Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Ukraine war news update for the 4th of April 2023. Let's go to our usual opening gambit, the Ukrainian official figures, the losses for the Russian forces for the day before, all the usual caveats, inaccurate propaganda. I think these are indicatively useful and actually pretty accurate, well, certainly in comparison to the Russian figures when they do produce things which are demonstrably away with the fairies to a large degree. Okay, so the Ukrainians claim that 530 Russian soldiers were liquidated yesterday. That is not a huge number, but it is above the war average, as I keep saying. It does, I think, reflect that there is a culmination of the Russian offensives. 8 tanks, 6 APCs, so that's ticked back up from the previous couple of days where we've seen a downtick in equipment losses. 3 artillery systems, that's a relatively low number for what we have seen. 1 MLRS, 15 drones. There was a drone strike last night, particularly on Odessa, which we'll come to in a second. 9 vehicles and fuel tanks. So I guess seeing 8 tanks and 6 APCs will please pro-Ukrainians more because that is moving further back up. But the troops and artillery systems, the losses there are not as high as they have been. Okay, what has happened yesterday? Well, I suppose the troop losses not being too high is reflected in or caused by the fact that only 69 attacks were reported by the Ukrainians across the front lines. That is a low number. We've been in triple figures consistently for some time recently, but that has come down over the last week or so to at times in the 50s. This is in the 60s, which is not a high number of attacks, which means that the front line is relatively calm apart from flashpoints such as Avdiivka and I believe Marinka yesterday, and of course Bakhmut. Right, moving on. I find this always interesting to check the different figures for the losses that are reported by Oryx. So, what's been interesting about the last week is that there was one day this week where, and Oryx, you've got to remember, aren't compiling lists of visually confirmed vehicles lost the day before. They get sent images that might have been, some of them might have even been lost 7 months ago, but it's only now that there's visual confirmation of that loss that trickles through to them. However, there will be more recent losses than older losses, in just the way that information becomes available on the internet. Now, for the list compiled yesterday, it's interesting to look at a couple of things. First of all, the numbers are again pretty close to each other. So the Ukrainians are starting to lose comparable amounts of equipment material to the Russians. I don't know whether that's just, as I say, images coming through from a haul previously that are being added, so it's not necessarily reflective of actually what's happened in the last couple of days. But even when the numbers are closer, I find it interesting to look at what type of things been lost. So the Ukrainians have lost, howitzers. They've lost 10 here that have been visually recorded. Some trucks, tankers, but 3 howitzers, 1 S-300 launcher that is damaged. That I presume was the Lancet drone one that I showed you the other day and said I wasn't sure that there was too much damage to that, but a Lancet drone did hit. So that is bad news for them. But then you look at the Russian, which has a Russian list which has 15, and then the first 4 are tanks. One is a T90. In fact, I do have a video image of that. And then you got another 2 tanks. So that's 6 tanks, 3 IFVs, and then an MRAP or another military vehicle, and then a couple, an MRL. So of the 15, 2 of them are kind of trucks, whereas of the 10 for the Ukrainians, you've got 6 of them are trucks. So even when the numbers are closer, actually it appears that Russia have lost a far greater value set of equipment. Now, I'm not trying to like spin this positively for Ukraine, but that just jumped out at me yesterday. It was like, oh, the numbers are pretty close, 10 and 15, because recently, or actually over the entire war, Ukraine had been, or Russia had been losing 3 to 4 times the amount of equipment that Ukraine have on a daily basis. So if you look at the stats now, the Russian visually confirmed losses are 3 to 4 times higher than Ukraine. So when you get days like this, when they're much closer, it jumps out at you. But then looking at the finer detail, it's interesting that the type of material that's lost between the two is very different. Now that could just be yesterday. There could be extenuating circumstances for that, but I just thought I'd point that out. So I'm going to have a little dive into the way that Oryx does their visually confirmed losses, because we had a conversation with someone on the thread the other day, and they didn't realize how like official it was, or how much work is actually put into it, and how much work is put in by followers of Oryx to make sure that there aren't double counts or triple counts and stuff like that. And it is, every single one of these will be hyperlinked on a website with at least one image to confirm that. Often multiple images from multiple directions, so that you can make sure that you can check that vehicle against the rest of the database, or a new vehicle against that one, to make sure you're not double counting. So it is, when there are 1,909 tanks, well, there was yesterday, there'll be more now. When there's over 1,900 tanks visually confirmed lost for the Russians, that is the bare minimum. So when you go back to this and say, 3,627 tanks have been claimed to have been destroyed or hit or abandoned or whatever by the Ukrainians, well, actually 1,915 of those are definitely 100% fall into that category. So the question is, how many have been lost that have not been photographed? And because at the moment that would be the difference between 1,915 and 3,627. Anyway, let's move on to the biggest piece of news from yesterday, which is drone strikes across, well, particularly Odessa. There are 17 drones, 14 have been taken down. I don't know about, of the three others, what happened. Other than Odessa was definitely hit. So this is the moment an Iranian-made kamikaze drone hit Odessa last night. Large fires reported, but authorities are not giving any details yet. They fear a second wave of drones could be launched. Well, that large fire, many people are saying it's either a fuel depot or an ammunition depot in Odessa. It was a significant fire, and caused something of a major issue. So thought that 15 drones were launched to attack Odessa. 11 are reportedly shot down. So that number is increased since he reported this. 2 hitting targets in the city at that point. 2 more remained near the south coast port. The residents heard scenes like this for much of the hour. That was last night, and they claim that one of them has hit an military airfield in Odessa. What happens when actual military targets are hit by the Russians in attacks like this? You generally don't hear too much. The Ukrainians are really good at operational security, and the local population are generally quite good because they are pro-Ukrainian. What happens, I think, when certain places are hit behind the lines in Russia is that you have pictures leaking out. Either they're just put on Telegram anyway, or you have pro-Ukrainian voices more likely to get that footage out. That's my speculation anyway. A T-90 tank was blown up near Avdiivka. Why that's important is that that's your most recent Russian tank. These are more prized than other tanks. There aren't as many of them, and when they do get hit, people kind of take notice. Also, I find it interesting it's near Avdiivka. Most of the T-90s I've seen being hit and taken out have been near Kremina, so the Kremina, Svatova to Kremina area. So it's interesting that's in Avdiivka. There is footage of hits on troops around Avdiivka, and the video claims they're Wagner troops. Now, I don't know how you tell. I think the thermal imaging of troops, but I think that's an interesting claim because there's been this argument as to whether Wagner are operational around Avdiivka or whether they're just up in Bakhmut. There have been denials from Prigozhin that they are around there, but that we've seen obituaries of Russian soldiers saying, or at least one saying that, as a Wagner soldier, he was killed in Avdiivka. The UN has released a report saying 22,607 civilian casualties have been lost in Ukraine since the start of the war. United Nations Officer, the High Commission for Human Rights, said there was an additional 765 casualties recorded in Ukraine in March alone. So the newest report brings the total number of civilian casualties in Ukraine to 22,607. Now, remember, casualties include injured as well as killed. So of that, the report suggests 8,451 are killed, 14,156 are injured. I would assume that such reports are going to be very conservative in their estimates. Reports that Ukraine has done a counterattack in a former settlement of Marinka, so a bit of military news here. I'll go into this in my frontline update. Things will be a bit odd today. I'm doing this a little bit earlier than normal because I've got to go to the cinema with my twin boys, so I don't have to. I'm choosing to. So I will try and get the frontline update out before I do that, but no promises. Anyway, Marinka, there's possibly been a counterattack from the Ukrainians around there. This would just be a localized counterattack. There are reports, no reports, that Ukrainian forces in the center of Marinka have carried out a number of counterattacks at Pobyeda, which is down south, quite a key to holding on to Marinka to allow or not allow it to be encircled by the Russians. Russian troops would also have been forced back several hundred meters due to a counterattack. The impact on the map of these attacks is not yet clear. So that would be good news for the Ukrainians there. It's a hellscape in Marinka, just rubble, horrible, horrific. So this is some very fascinating footage coming out from Khmelnytsky, which is in the west of Ukraine. So church battle continues in western Ukraine. The Russian-leaning Orthodox priests beat up a Ukrainian war veteran who criticized their Moscow affiliation. By afternoon, locals had driven the priests out and held a service in Ukrainian. Fascinating. Just insane that these men of the cloth are resorting to physical violence. It just, my God, you would never ever see this in a Church of England church in England, in the UK. I mean, it's a long time since I've been to a church, but I'm pretty sure they're not big on beating up their congregation. But then I don't suppose they're used to people heckling in church either. But let's have a little look at this. And then being frog marched out of the church. But this is reflective of the ongoing tensions in Ukraine concerning the Russian Orthodox Church and its involvement in the war, kind of directly as well as indirectly in support of the Russian war project. But there you go. That footage goes on. Not great scenes. Not good for their PR, I don't think. And then footage. What to make of this? So, as we know, Tatarsky, Vladlen Tatarsky, or Fomin, depending, that's not his real name. Fomin is his real name. He was killed in a bomb attack. A statuette given to him blew up in the cafe in St. Petersburg. Now they've arrested this woman. There are so many theories going around. All the evidence looks like this was Russian. In fact, there are pro-Russians claiming that it was Russians. There are people claiming it was the Russian MOD, that it was pro-Ukrainians in Russia, a separatist group, and not the Ukrainian government. There are all sorts of claims going on. I find her admission here, very interesting, the way she says it.
Понимаю. За...
So let's read this to you. Do you understand what you've been detained for? It's look at the size before she answers questions. I don't know quite what this tells me, but it tells me something. Do you understand what you've been detained for? I do. What for? That pause. For I would say for being at the spot of the killing of Vlad and Tatarsky. It's a really interesting answer there. It's like I was there when he died. That's what I've been arrested for. What did you do? And then look at her shoulders. Just go back. It's always the little things. I don't know what this tells you. It's like it's resignation. Is it? She knows she's been expected to say certain things. I don't know. So look at her shoulders and her sigh. What did you do? That I bought a figurine there, a figurine which exploded. Now, does that mean to say that kind of sigh? That does that mean that she has to say that, but that's not what happened? Or is she saying that because she's resigning to the fact that it's true and she is responsible? I don't know. So many ways you can read the body language going on here. Who gave you this figurine? And again, you get the same side and the same shoulder. I can explain later. So there's definitely more than meets the eye. You know, pro-Russians would get hold of this and say, look, she's admitted, she was there, she's responsible. I'm not saying she wasn't necessarily, but I'm saying there's a way more going on behind this so-called admission than meets the eye, and there are still an awful lot of people and loads of analysts saying it was definitely Russia, or is this, or is this, or is that, and you've got Russians also, you know, making such claims as well. So there is this infighting going on in the mill blogger community and in within Russian sources as well as others to say that hey, it may not have been her, or definitely wasn't her, probably wasn't her, or could have been her, or it definitely was her. All of the options. Zelensky's come out and said this is a problem for Russia. He's almost been dismissive of it. He's like, this is a Russian problem. We've got our own issues to deal with. So he's just like dismissed it, you know, out of hand. Um, Meanwhile, not concerned with that, but Russian propagandists, Solovyov particularly, have been just off the leash, just going nuts again. He said last night, yesterday, I believe, let's destroy the city of Kyiv, to hell with it, wipe it off the face of the earth. It should be destroyed, as well as Kharkiv, Odessa. So genocide is still rampant with Yuman Solovyov, but he's also making loads of really interesting religious claims. He's linking this to, you know, Russia being a weapon of judgment for God, etc., etc. Loads of interesting claims. Meanwhile, in Russia, top state TV propagandist Solovyov claims that God has chosen Russia to be the weapon of his judgment. He advocates for the continued use of thermobaric weapons, demanding more blood and destruction. This is called kind of post hoc rationalization. It's rationalizing things after the facts, but it's also codifying morality in your own version of God. So he is supposedly Jewish, and I say supposedly because you don't know whether it's just conveniently so. And saying these sort of things, I don't know. I don't want to get into the long weeds of talking about religion here, but he's certainly using his idea of religion to justify the certain moral positions. And moral positions are it's good to use thermobaric weapons to bring about blood and destruction, and these places should be wiped off the map, off the face of the earth. And it's all right because God says so. That kind of thing. Now, nothing to whether you're religious or not is kind of irrelevant here. The point is that that's what he's doing, for right or wrong, and he is using, and we've seen this kind of uptick in religious rhetoric coming into the information sphere, particularly with the propagandists. I don't know whether that's a sign of desperation, or just when you're looking like you're going to go to the ICC in The Hague, maybe your last ditch effort is to try and invoke God as a defense. Now, Colonel General Muradov, he's a guy that was responsible for Vuhledar, and indeed, I believe, the air defense as well, possibly. Or there's something out. It's not just Vuhledar, but anyway, apparently Putin has dismissed the general. He was a crazy idiot who failed on the offensive in Vuhledar. But the claim was he was a crazy idiot. He is dismissed from his post as commander of the Eastern Military District and removed from command just 7 months after his appointment. So that is definitely an interesting development, but probably the right thing for Putin to do. I mean, he oversaw just stupidity down there and the death of a lot of people. So Russian telegrams are are reporting that military communications of the Ukrainian armed forces have been intercepted that suggest that some form of offensive operation is imminent. Well, yeah, I guess so. Depends what you mean by imminent. Across the Eastern Front and in the Zaporizhia direction. The translation is they report on combat readiness in all directions and a probable start of the offensive of the armed forces of Ukraine. Today, there were radio interceptions of enemy communications, which also indicated preparations for an offensive. I doubt you're going to see an offensive for the next month. I really do. Just the weather, plus the training, plus the troops, plus the equipment, they're just not in place. Now, there are some people claiming that the hits on Odessa, that big explosion in Odessa, is connected to this imminent counteroffensive. That perhaps this was the Russians trying to hit some of the accumulations or whatnot, that are there as a result of this supposedly imminent counteroffensive. And then other people sort of denying that. Now, before we move on to military aid, just a bit of light-hearted bits and bobs here. This is now. I don't know if any of you have been following this. I've seen this. There's a few videos of the beaver in the trench. Right, there's this ongoing battle that has been waged between a beaver and some soldiers in the Ukrainian trench. Ukrainian soldiers. So this is. Don't worry, no harm was done to the animal, but they're trying to obviously get the beaver out because it's not a great place for a beaver to be. So there are videos of these guys, getting the beaver out, dragging it to as far away as they can safely get it, and then as soon as they do so, as soon as they release it, it just runs straight back to the trench and goes back in the trench. And these guys are exasperated because there's this ongoing battle. There's plenty of video footage of this beaver being pulled out of the trenches and just running straight back in. There's loads of memes coming out about this beaver. And anyway, there's now even a Wikipedia page, I believe, which is the Battle of the Trench 2023. Unknown Ukrainian soldier drags a beaver from the trench. And then the belligerents, armed forces of Ukraine, and the beaver. Result: decisive beaver victory. Beaver retains occupation of trench. I love it. You got to have stuff like this in the midst of a war to keep spirits high. But there is an ongoing battle there. I hope and I believe no harm has been done to the beaver. Right. Going on to military aid, several MiG-29s have already been sent to Ukraine. This is from Poland. I reported on this yesterday, just to kind of re-emphasize this. Slovakia have already sent a bunch of theirs, or at least I don't know that they were sent. They were picked up from the airport and airfield and flown by Ukrainian pilots. So this is a historic step. The transfer of MiG-29s to Ukraine. We have 3 brigades of such aircraft today. There are 5 brigades, 2 Su-27 and 3 MiG-29 brigades. Speaker of the Air Force, Yuri Ikonat, said the end. So I believe that they have now reconstituted their airframes to the point where they have as many MiG-29s as when they started the war, before the war. So they're there with MiG-29s, which is fantastic. These are older aircraft, and there is no advantage for the Ukrainians here over the Russian forces. In order to get advantage, they do need more modern airframes. They desperately need NATO jets. I suggest going to watch Perun's latest video. It is a very good video that gives you a good indication of what's going on there. And indeed, the Telegraph were interviewing over the last few days some pilots, and their one big thing they keep going on and on about understandably, is the need for Western jets. Right now, we can only hold the enemy, but with F-16s, we could control the airfield. I guess that means the airspace. 6 months required to train. We had a list of advanced pilots to be trained on F-16s, and unfortunately, some of those have already been killed in action. So there are some people that saying that, and some of you in the thread have said, I know that there are Ukrainian pilots being trained in the US. That if they are, then Ukraine are reacting oddly to that because they are calling for the start of training for a lot of their pilots. Now, this could be psyops. There could be training on Mirage in France. It could be training on F-16s in the US. I know that there have been some people having specific training in the US, but I don't think it's general F-16 training. I think it's like, giving trying to get an assessment of the pilots to see whether would be good for training, that kind of thing. I don't know. There's also different information around the information space about that kind of thing. But what is certainly true is that the Ukrainians are publicly calling out for NATO jets. Norway and Denmark will supply 8,000 155mm shells from stocks, which is fantastic. Of course, that's about 2 days worth of stocks. So that again indicates the desperation for ammunition for both sides, but more so for the Ukrainians, so that they can attempt to match the fire rate that the Russians have. But of course, the Russians have shell hunger as well. Sorry, I've already done Poland handing over MiG-29s. There are supposed to be 20 to 22 in total. I think that's from Poland, and plus 10 from Slovakia, or thereabouts. Should mean about 30 in total, but I'm not 100% sure. Challenger 2, there are photos of the Challenger 2, and there's some videos of them in Ukraine. I can't verify that 100%. This might be Poland, but nevertheless, Challenger, yeah, arguments that they are there. I've seen a Challenger with barrels on the back. I'm not quite sure. Someone can let me know what the use of those are. But yeah, could be that Challenger. There's even a picture claiming to be a Leopard in Ukraine firing, actually. But again, I'm not 100% sure myself. Tomorrow, NATO countries will speak about multi-year support program for Ukraine. This is Jens Stoltenberg talking about, this is a long-term thing. They're not just going to be supporting Ukraine during the war. There's going to be a legacy in place as well. Okay, let's go on to geopolitics. Right. Citing energy needs, Japan won an exception to the rules binding G7 nations, so that's a group of 7 most powerful nations in the world. It is buying oil at prices above the $60 price cap established by allies. Japan has stepped up its purchase of Russian natural gas over the past year. So Japan have argued that they should be exempt. I haven't had time to look into the details of this, but it is overly dependent, as it says here, on foreign energy. And they have been for 90 years, as according to that. And here they appear to be very dependent on Russian oil. So, it's talking out both sides of your mouth, saying, yeah, we condemn Russia and we're going to supply assistance to Ukraine, but at the same time, we're going to buy Russian oil at a pretty good rate for them. I would have thought they'd be in a position to buy it under the $60 a barrel mark, but what do I know? Yeah, make of that what you will. Chinese spy balloon. This isn't to do with Ukraine, but may have ramifications militarily. Chinese spy balloon gathered intel. It did gather intel from sensitive military sites and had a self-destruct mechanism. That's according to NBC News. Despite efforts to block it, the intelligence China collected was mostly from electronic signals, which can be picked up by weapon system or include communications from bases, so on and so forth. So, that's an interesting development in that story. Right, Russia is confiscating passports from its elites, fearing they will defect over its invasion of Ukraine, a report says. What's interesting about this is that it's an indication of where Russia think this war is going. Are they really upbeat? Do they think it's all going really well? And do they think they're going to win? So on and so forth. Well, if they're starting to do things like taking passports off officials and state company executives because they're worried that they may defect as they oppose the war, then they're probably not thinking that. And this is a reflection that they really do understand that they're up against it at the moment and things aren't going as well as they might have hoped. So that's an interesting development. The UK MOD earlier said that Russia was taking passports to stop the flight or defection of officials. The Kremlin and its FSB agency fear people could leave because they privately object to the war and feel the sanctions on Russia are ruining their lavish lifestyles. The report says. Uh, Sources told the newspaper that security officers demanded some of the country's elites hand over travel documents enforcing Soviet era rules that had rarely been applied until recently. This is in the Financial Times. So I may dip into that a little bit more in an extra, although today's extra is going to be tonight and it's going to be an interview with Anastasia Paraskevova, who lives in Kharkiv. It's a live, so come and jump on the live stream and let us know what you think. Right. I told you that yesterday, German Vice Chancellor Robert Habeck, who's of the Green Party, is a coalition government in Germany. But he's the energy minister, and this is a really fascinating admission. So he says, I feel deeply ashamed that our help came so late. It took so long and it was too late. I feel deeply ashamed, said Robert Habeck to Zelensky as he was visiting Kyiv yesterday. It's rare for politicians to admit mistakes in our time. So that is a rare bit of candid opinion from him, but I'm sure that would be a welcome admission from Ukraine, as they've been criticizing Germany for such. So he's fronted up and admitted that, and now let's hope that those wrongs are put right. Now, I talked to you about Armenia having huge double standards by saying, yeah, we're part of the ICC now, the International Criminal Court. We've signed up to the Rome Statute. We're not going to arrest Putin, but we're more interested in applying this to the Azerbaijan conflict going on our borders and in our land. And it's like you don't sign up to this to just cherry pick what you're going to apply what should be universal principles to. And so I was really damning of that. But actually, the reality is that Russia, as soon as Armenia joined the ICC, Russia started piling on a whole heap of pressure, including stopping importing all of Armenia's dairy products, a load of economic, agricultural pressure on Armenia. And, Armenia was being quite brave, quite courageous in their stance on Russia recently. And they've had to calm that rhetoric down, and said they wouldn't arrest Putin. And yes, it is still double standards. All that remains. It is massive double standards, but it's understanding why they're doing that. When we're having such pressure put on them by Russia, which could lead to their economic, collapse, or at least some economic hardship that will then, filter through to their population. Then you can understand there's an explanation. Explanations are not justifications, though. So I'm not saying that's a good thing that they said they wouldn't arrest Putin. However, it's about understanding motivations for such actions. So, as ever, geopolitics is nuanced. We can understand why they might have committed to those double standards. It's still not great, is my opinion. It's good to see countries in the sphere of influence, traditional sphere of influence of Russia, stand up to Russia at this point, because it shows that their power base isn't as strong as maybe they had previously thought, and this war is doing them more damage than just what might be evident with the West and in Ukraine, but in the South Caucasus and in the Eurasian sort of area, there are ramifications for their decision to go to war. But these things are tough, and we can maybe understand why Armenia might have calmed their rhetoric down a little bit. But let's hope that Armenia get the support from the West to embolden them to stand up to Russia, would be my conclusion there. Anyway, thank you. That's today's news. Please like, subscribe, and share. I'll try and get you a frontline update out now. I might just about have time. And watch out for the interview I do with Anastasia later today. Please come and join in with that one. Anyway, toodle pips.